When most people hear the question, who's making Marvel's Wolverine, the obvious answer is Insomniac Games. And technically that is true, but it's not the full answer, because the game is being shaped by three major companies, and each one has a completely different role in what Marvel's Wolverine eventually becomes. You have PlayStation, which owns Insomniac and is publishing the game. You have Insomniac Games, which is actually building it. And then you have Marvel Games, which controls the character and works with Insomniac on how Wolverine and his world are adapted. So before we get into the individual directors, writers, actors, combat designers, consultants, and everyone else involved, we need to understand how these three companies fit together. Because once you understand their roles, you start to get a much clearer picture of the direction this game could be heading. So let's start with PlayStation. Sony Interactive Entertainment is the larger company behind the PlayStation brand. They oversee the hardware, the PlayStation Store, online services, publishing, marketing, and the collection of first-party developers known as PlayStation Studios. And Insomniac Games is now one of those studios. Sony officially acquired Insomniac in 2019 after the two companies had already worked closely together for years. That means Insomniac is no longer just an outside developer making a game for PlayStation. Sony owns the studio. And because Marvel's Wolverine is a first-party PlayStation game, Sony has a major role in the business side of the project. They are publishing it, helping funding it, marketing it, planning its release, and positioning it as one of the major games in the PlayStation lineup. That doesn't mean Sony executives are sitting in a room deciding how Logan swings his claws or what every mission should look like. That part falls much more heavily on Insomniac, but Sony still has control over the larger picture: budgets, deadlines, resources, release timing, marketing, and how the game fits into PlayStation's overall strategy. For Sony, Marvel's Wolverine is not only a game, it's also a major PlayStation product. It has the potential to sell systems, strengthen the PlayStation 5 library, bring in Marvel fans, and continue PlayStation's reputation for large, cinematic, story-driven games. That reputation matters here. When people think of major PlayStation first-party games, they usually expect strong visuals, detailed animation, performance capture, accessibility options, cinematic storytelling, and a level of polish that separates them from a smaller release. Marvel's Wolverine is clearly being positioned in that same category. So PlayStation's main role is creating the structure around the project. They provide the platform, the publishing support, the money, the marketing power, and the larger corporate backing needed to make a game on this scale. But PlayStation is not the team physically creating Logan's movement, combat, missions, storytelling, or environments. That responsibility belongs to Insomniac Games. And this is where the game itself really begins to take shape. Insomniac has been around since 1994, making them officially as old as I am. And their history covers a surprisingly wide range of games. They created Spyro the Dragon, Ratchet and Clank, Resistance, and Sunset Overdrive. Also, of course, the Marvel's Spider-Man series. That experience makes them a very interesting studio for Wolverine. They have spent years making games with fast movement, creative options, strong character animation, cinematic action, and emotional storytelling. They have also already proven that they can take a major Marvel character and create their own version of that world. Insomniac's Spider-Man was not simply based on one movie, one comic, or one previous version of Peter Parker. They took decades of history and built something that still felt familiar, but also felt like it belonged specifically to them. And that is probably the biggest clue for what they're doing with Wolverine. This is not supposed to be Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. It is not a direct remake of one of the movies, and it does not appear to be adapting one specific comic storyline from beginning to end. This is Insomniac's version of Logan. That means they can pull from different parts of history, mix familiar characters and locations together, change certain relationships, redesign costumes, and create a story that still feels like Wolverine without copying something we have already seen. But Wolverine also presents a very different challenge than Spider-Man. Spider-Man is built around speed, agility, vertical movement, web swinging, crowd control, and avoiding lethal force. Wolverine is the complete opposite in many ways. He hits heavier, more aggressive, more direct. His combat is built around getting close, taking damage, healing through it, and overwhelming enemies with violence. So Insomniac cannot simply take the Spider-Man formula, slow slow it down and give Peter Parker claws. The entire game has to communicate who Logan is. His movement needs weight. His attacks need impact. His healing factor needs to matter. His fighting style needs to feel experienced, brutal, and personal. And the combat needs to show the difference between Logan being in control and Wolverine completely losing it. That is one of the biggest tests for Insomniac. We already know they can make superhero action look impressive. The question is whether they can make Wolverine feel dangerous. Because if Logan feels too light, too clean, too safe, or too similar to Spider-Man, the entire identity of the game starts to fall apart. The tone is just important. Insomniac's Spider-Man games have serious moments, but they still have a lot of humor, color, and optimism. Wolverine's world should feel rougher, more personal, more violent, and probably much more uncomfortable at times. His stories usually deal with trauma, memory, guilt, manipulation, isolation, and the fear that underneath everything, he might be exactly what other people tried to turn him into, a weapon. That gives Insomniac the chance to tell a much darker story than what they have done with Spider-Man. But darker does not automatically mean better. They still need emotional depth. They still need characters that matter, and they need to make sure that Logan feels like more than an angry man cutting through enemies for an entire game. This is also where the structure of Marvel's Wolverine becomes important. This is not being positioned as another open world Spider-Man game. It is a more focused single player action adventure, and I think that's exactly what a Wolverine game should feel like. A more controlled structure gives Insomniac greater control over pacing, atmosphere, enemy encounters, level design, and how Logan's story unfolds. Instead of filling a giant map with activities, they can focus more heavily on specific locations, carefully designed combat areas, environmental storytelling, and a more deliberate journey. That does not automatically mean the game will be completely linear. There could still be larger areas, optional paths, exploration, or hub locations, but the main goal does not appear to be creating another huge open world, and we already knew that. The focus seems to be on building an experience around Wolverine himself, and because Insomniac is the lead developer, most of what we eventually judge will come back to their decisions. How the claws feel, how enemies react, how damage works, how stealth fits into the game, how much freedom players have during missions, how long the combat stays interesting, how the story balances Wolverine with a larger cast around him. Sony may own the studio, Marvel may own the character, but Insomniac is the company that has to turn all of that into something that is actually fun to play. Then we get to Marvel Games, and this is probably the company people understand the least. Marvel Games is the part of Marvel that works with developers creating games based on Marvel characters. They are not the same thing as Marvel Studios. Marvel Studios is responsible for the MCU films and television projects. Marvel Games works on video games. Pretty self-explanatory. That distinction matters because Marvel's Wolverine should not automatically be treated like an MCU project. There is no reason to assume this game has to follow the movies, connect it to upcoming films, copy Hugh Jackman's version of Logan, or fit into Marvel Studios' plans. This is an original game being made by Insomniac, PlayStation, and Marvel Games. Marvel Games' role is to help Insomniac use Wolverine and his world in a way that feels authentic to the character. Marvel owns Logan. They own the X-Men. They control the names, histories, costumes, villains, relationships, locations, and the mythology surrounding those characters. So Insomniac cannot just do anything they want without Marvel being involved. But Marvel's role is not simply to sit in the background and tell Insomniac what they are not allowed to do. Based on how Marvel Games has described its previous work with Insomniac, the relationship appears to be more of a collaboration. Marvel brings decades of source material and knowledge about the characters. Insomniac brings experience of turning those characters into an actual game. That means Marvel Games can help with questions like, does this feel like Logan? Would this character act this way? Does this relationship make sense? Is this design still recognizable? Does this story understand what Wolverine is really about? At the same time, Insomniac still needs room to create something original, because the goal is not to copy old comics panel for panel. The goal is to take pieces of Wolverine's history and rearrange them into a new version of the character. That could include Weapon X, Team X, Madripoor, Japan, the Reavers, mutant conflicts, his military history, his missing memories, his relationship relationships with Jean Grey and other mutants, there is a huge amount of material they could pull from. The more interesting question is not whether Insomniac is using the comics. Of course they are. The real question is which parts they chose, how they changed them, and what those choices tell us about the story they want to tell. Marvel Games also acts as a kind of a guardrail. They can help make sure Insomniac does not change Logan so much that he stops feeling like Wolverine. Because even with a brand new story, there are certain parts of the character that need to remain. He is rough, he has a violent past, he has a complicated moral code, he struggles with control and hates being manipulated. And even though he often acts like he does not need anyone, he can be incredibly loyal to the people he cares about. That balance between brutality and humanity is one of the most important parts of Wolverine, and Marvel Games can help protect that while still allowing Insomniac to create its own interpretation. But there is another side to that. Anytime a major company owns the character, there are going to be limits. There may be ideas Marvel does not approve. There may be characters, designs, or story decisions that need additional review. There may be boundaries around how far Insomniac can push certain parts of the world. We do not know exactly where those boundaries are for this game yet, and unless someone involved talks openly about that process, we may not know until after release. That is why Marvel's involvement can be both reassuring and concerning. On one hand, they can help keep Wolverine authentic. On the other hand, too much brand control could potentially limit creative freedom. The important thing is that Marvel Games does not appear to be making the game for Insomniac. They're helping guide how the Marvel characters and world are used. So when you put these three companies together, the relationship becomes much easier to understand. PlayStation is supporting, funding, publishing, and positioning the game as a major PlayStation 5 release. Insomniac is designing and building the actual experience, and Marvel Games is helping shape how Wolverine and his history are adapted. Each company has a different goal. PlayStation wants a successful, high-quality game that strengthens the PlayStation brand. Insomniac wants to turn Wolverine into a compelling game with its own identity, and Marvel Games wants to make sure the final result still understands and respects the character. The game has to satisfy all three, but companies do not write dialogue, they do not direct performance, they do not design combat encounters or build individual levels. People do. And once you look beyond these three logos and start examining the people actually making the major creative decisions, the story of who is really making Marvel's Wolverine becomes much more interesting. Before we jump into the people actually leading Marvel's Wolverine, I just want to take a quick second and say thank you. We recently hit one of my biggest goals on YouTube by becoming a YouTube partner, and because of all of your support, channel memberships are finally live. I also want to give a huge shout out to the first two people who believed in the channel enough to become members. Screen shoutouts will be a reoccurring thing on this channel for new members. Seriously, thank you both. Being the first members of the channel means a lot to me, and you're helping support future videos just like this one. Now that we've looked at the three companies behind Marvel's Wolverine, it's time to take a look at the people leading the project. Because like I said, companies don't make games, people do. And while hundreds of developers are contributing to Marvel's Wolverine, there are a handful of names that sit at the top of the creative process. Let's start with the creative director. That role belongs to Marcus Smith. If you've played Ratchet & Clank or Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, you've already experienced some of his work. As a creative director, Marcus Smith is responsible for the overall vision of Marvel's Wolverine. He's the person making sure every department is working towards the same goal. Story, the gameplay, the tone, the world, and the overall direction all have to fit together, and that's ultimately his responsibility. Working alongside him is Mike Daly, the game director. While the creative director focuses on the vision, the game director focuses on how that vision actually plays. Mike Daly oversees the gameplay experience, helping shape everything from combat and controls to pacing and player feel. If something doesn't feel right when you're playing, that's the kind of area the game director is helping guide. Then we have Walt Williams, the narrative director. Walt is best known for his work on Spec Ops: The Line, a game that's still praised for its storytelling. On Marvel's Wolverine, he's leading the narrative team, helping shape Logan's journey, the dialogue, character relationships, and the emotional moments that bring the story together. Supporting that vision is a team of writers including Mary Kenny, Joe Halstead, Nick Folkman, and Walt Williams himself. Writing a game of this size isn't the work work of one person. Every conversation, every cutscene, every mission, and every character interaction comes from a collaborative writing team working to make Logan feel authentic while telling a new story. On the Marvel side, one of the key names is Eric Monacelli, executive producer at Marvel Games. His role is to work closely with Insomniac throughout development, helping ensure Wolverine and the Marvel Universe stay true to the source material while still giving the developers room to tell their own original story. Another name worth recognizing is Jess Reiner-Reed, the senior project director. This isn't a role players hear about very often, but it's incredibly important. A project this large has hundreds of developers working across multiple teams, and someone has to keep everything moving in the same direction. Project leadership helps coordinate schedules, milestones, communication, and development so the game stays on track. One part of the game development that's easy to overlook is performance. Even the best written characters still need someone to bring them to life. Logan is being portrayed by McIntyre, who takes one of the most recognizable roles in all of comics. Every line of dialogue, every emotional moment, and every performance you see from Wolverine begins with the actor before it's refined through motion capture, animation, and the rest of the development team. Joining him, and I hope I get this right, is Krizia Bajos as Jean Grey, another iconic Marvel character who will play a role in the story. Like Liam, her performance helps shape not only the dialogue, but also the emotion and chemistry between the characters on screen. Voice actors are often one of the final pieces that transform a character from words on a page into someone players genuinely connect with. No matter how strong the writing or animation is, it's the performance that makes those moments feel real. Then there's the music. Marvel's Wolverine is being composed by McCreary, whose work includes God of War Ragnarok, and many other major films and games. Music has the ability to shape tension, emotion, and atmosphere in ways players don't always notice, making the composer one of the most important creative voices behind the scene. Of course, these aren't the only people making Marvel's Wolverine. There are entire teams dedicated to art, animation, combat, accessibility, motion capture, audio, level design, quality assurance, programming, visual effects, and much more. However, Insomniac hasn't publicly identified the leaders of many of those departments. Rather than speculate or guess who's leading those teams, I think it's more important to stick with what's been officially confirmed. There is one outside company that has received a lot of attention, and that's Sweet Baby Inc. Their publicly reported role on Marvel's Wolverine is narrative consulting. That means they provide feedback on story-related elements, but they are not the game's primary writers, directors, or developers. Their involvement has become one of the more debated topics surrounding the game. Some players believe narrative consultants can have a significant influence on a game's direction, while others believe that influence is often overstated. Since the exact scope of their work hasn't been made public, it's important to separate confirmed information from assumptions. When you take a step back and look at everything together, one thing becomes pretty clear. Marvel's Wolverine isn't being built by a single person. It's a collaboration between creative leadership, gameplay specialists, writers, composers, project managers, Marvel Games, and hundreds of developers working towards the same goal. Whether Marvel's Wolverine becomes one of the greatest superhero games ever made won't come down to just one name in the credits. It will come down to how all of these people and teams brought their experience together to create something worthy of one of Marvel's most iconic characters. And if you made it this far, I absolutely appreciate your time. And if you have the time, please hype up the video, hit the like button, and share your thoughts down in the comment section below so that more people can see my content. So subscribe if you're not subscribed, share my content with someone you might think will enjoy it. Let them know to like, share, comment, and subscribe as well. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys have a good day, a good night, and a good morning wherever you're at, and I'll see you in the next one.